This video is better on Nebula. Use the link in the description below to support our changing climate directly by signing up for Nebula. There, you can watch this video ad-free and also watch over 25 OCC videos that I haven't released on YouTube, including my most recent bonus video diving into why the promise of ecological masculinity is not as it seems. In the long history of science, there's this man, Francis Bacon. A man of reason who, for many, was the person who helped usher Imperial England into an age of rationality and objectivity. An era of science where man, through the intimate study of nature, would gain dominion over everything. The scientific revolution. In his quest to understand and progress the role of man in the world, Bacon was blunt. He called for a blessed race of Hermes and Supermen to conquer and subdue nature, to storm and occupy her castles and strongholds. For Bacon, the world around him was ripe for the taking. He just needed to understand and dissect it in order to exploit it. While this thinking might seem outdated in today's world of climate chaos, Francis Bacon's sexually charged call for scientific control of nature was merely a foreshadowing of what's to come.
Drill, baby, drill.
Patriarchal masculinities now pervade the politics and action surrounding the climate crisis and capitalist extraction.
American energy dominance.
So as the world plunges deeper and deeper into environmental crisis, we need to understand what might be driving us recklessly over the edge. Today, we tackle patriarchal responses to climate change, how the relentless pursuit of manhood is driving the planet to the brink of extinction, why this guy is a warning sign to all climate justice movements, and how we might forge a world beyond the obstacles of gender. If you look at the people with the most wealth and power across the globe, you'll find a whole lot of white men. These men hold immense sway over whether or not we avoid the worst of climate chaos. Indeed, we've known about the threat of climate change for well over 40 years, and yet they've done very little to avoid it. Climate models still project temperatures to reach 2.7 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century, with the worst case scenario reaching as high as 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. Given this trajectory, it would be easy to think that men are killing the planet. These powerful men have the capability to save the world, but instead are letting it die. But it's not so simple. To understand the role of gender in the climate crisis, we need to disentangle individual men from patriarchy and masculinity. These two concepts can help us understand that it's not simply the nature of individual men in power to be destructive and exploitative. There is a structural and cultural system of gender leading us down the path of environmental destruction. A system that these men buy into, and a system through which they maintain their power. As feminist scholar Bell Hooks writes, patriarchy is a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything and everyone deemed weak, especially females, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. We all live under a patriarchal system, and especially in the imperial core, this system bombards us with what is deemed to be good for men and what actions men need to take to be successful.
Galactically stupid!
The last thing I want is someone needing me.
Mad talk.
As well as what they shouldn't do.
Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't.
Father, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do.
You can act like a man!
Why don't you just put on a dress and weep like a little girl?
As feminist thinkers have long argued, anyone, not just cisgender men, which is another way of saying those whose gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth, can be wedded to patriarchal thinking and action.
We're not the same. Women are the lesser vessel.
We are the weaker sex, but we are our partner, our husband's wife.
And just like people of any gender can be part of upholding patriarchy, all people suffer under patriarchal rule. For boys, the conditioning to fit within patriarchal ideals starts young. As Hooks writes in her book Will to Change, the first act of violence that patriarchy demands of males is not violence towards women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves. And if that person isn't successful in shutting down their emotions, he can count on patriarchal men to enact rituals of power that will assault his self-esteem. Under our patriarchal system, there is a prevailing vision of what manhood should be. This is called hegemonic masculinity. Traits like overconfidence, dominance, aloneness, disconnection, anger, and strength are core to what it means to be a man under patriarchy.
will find you. And I will kill you.
When men perform these traits, they are rewarded with recognition from their peers or even with material compensation. Indeed, patriarchal gender roles that separate certain traits into a binary of male and female have long been used to secure workers, soldiers, and the continued production of the capitalist machine. As fellow YouTuber Alice Capel puts it,
so the promotion of heteronormativity, which includes heterosexuality as well as the gender binary, gender roles, is a great way to make sure that we have a bunch of self-reliant families that can make babies, that can then become soldiers, workers, all ensuring the preservation of a nation.
So it's not just cultural cues and reinforcement, but the very structures of our economy that help to reinforce what it means to be a good woman or man. And when men strive to fit into that patriarchal vision of masculinity, it inevitably leads them down a road of violence, rage, and dominance. But the reality is there is a diverse range of masculinities, ones that embrace love, empathy, and connection, and reveal that being a man does not necessarily mean being violent or seeking dominance over others. As we will soon see, the system that rewards destruction and demands obedience, this patriarchal system, not only leads to violence and domination of other people, but also of the planet. On the backroads of Virginia, plumes of smoke billow up out of exhaust pipes. This black smoke isn't pumping into the air to send more torque to an 18-wheeler lugging a heavy load up a long hill, nor is it from an excavator breaking through tough ground. No, this black smoke belongs to these. Trucks kitted out and altered to roll coal, a trend that's garnered millions of views on YouTube videos documenting pickup drivers across the US blasting black soot into the windshields of electric cars, pedestrians, and bicycle riders.
Yeah! Bring us hunting, son!
And behind the wheel of these machines are almost always men. As one former coal roller, Sean Miller, admits in an interview, these guys thrive on how much coal they can roll when they're in town next to hybrid cars. It's just a testosterone thing. It's manhood. Trucks have long been coded as an object of value for men under a patriarchal system.
This one's for the builders. The ability to lead.
Powering your truck. Guts, glory, Ram.
It's a symbol of power, of control, and of strength. A vessel through which truck drivers can assert their manhood. Rolling coal merely kicks that up into high gear, and in doing so lays bare how patriarchal men respond when threatened by climate action. Indeed, rolling coal significantly decreases the already dismal gas mileage of a truck. It's essentially a middle finger to environmentalism made into a car part. A seller of coal rolling modification kits explains that for many of his customers, that's their way of giving environmentalists the finger. You want clean air and a tiny carbon footprint? Well, screw you.
Prius repellent, it's jokingly or not so jokingly called.
Through rolling coal, white men reassert their alignment with patriarchy by destroying the environment and dominating their perceived enemies. As scholar Mark Allister writes in the book Eco-Man, within the powerful social construction of masculinity, the way to prove one's manhood is not to test oneself in nature, but to destroy it. In short, hegemonic masculinity demands that for men to prove their worth, to be valued, they must assert control over the natural world. And rolling coal is just one example of this. It packs a 1-2 punch of directly aggravating climate-conscious people by blowing smoke into their face, while simultaneously exacerbating global warming through gratuitous emissions. But that black smoke spewing from Ford F-150 tailpipes reveals a larger reality of the interconnectedness of fossil capital and patriarchal masculinity. A reality that feminist political scientist Kara Daggett refers to as petromasculinity, or what Andreas Malm and the Zetkin Collective call fossilized masculinities. Cars, coal, and bloody slabs of meat have all been, historically, objects used to assert manhood. They are tightly aligned with our conceptions of strength.
We're starting with liver, 4 ounces, and bone marrow, right out of this beautiful piece of femur.
Ruggedness.
Helping fuel America's future from right here at home.
And power and independence.
1,800 pounds of do whatever the heck I want.
So when those objects are called into question for their outsized impact on the environment, as the Zetkin Collective write, one reaction will be the bellicose reassertion of it. The cornered man will strike back and overreact. Petromasculinity is the shape masculinity takes when white men feel that fossil fuels, which they have long used to feel powerful and valued under patriarchy, are being stripped away from them, and they subsequently react by using more oil and gas, ultimately hardening the connections between fuel and manhood. And yes, I have been purposely saying white men, because as multiple studies have shown, white men in the imperial core are the most likely to deny climate change, the least likely to take environmental action, and often have the highest carbon footprint. Patriarchy and white supremacy are inextricably linked. In this society, where you find one form of dominance, you will also find the other.
I'm not a fan of Islam. I think it's fair to call me Islamophobic.
Proud Boys as a consensus aren't anti-women in the workplace, we're just pro-housewives.
They want to make beautiful women wear these things that look like garbage bags.
Petromasculinity often expresses itself as belligerent refusal or denial of climate change tied to racist ultranationalism. We're seeing this through line of white supremacist patriarchy across proto-fossil fascist figureheads like Trump and the president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro. Trump is the epitome of patriarchal masculinity. He seems to believe that his personal value and manhood comes from dominating women, forcing obedience, venerating individuality, and vilifying the racialized other.
We have people coming into the country. These aren't people. These are animals.
Throughout his tenure in the Oval Office, he carried his domineering masculinity from the personal into the global realm of fossil fuels and energy.
With these incredible resources, my administration will seek not only the American energy independence that we've been looking for so long, but American energy dominance.
For Trump and his followers, fossil fuels are an essential part of power. They are the key to American domination of the world.
But what we want now is not independence. We want American energy dominance. Dominance.
And while Trump was reacting to a perceived threat to fossil fuels and patriarchy in the north, down south in Brazil, then President Jair Bolsonaro was being even more explicit in tying manhood to anti-environmentalism. Throughout his political career, Bolsonaro endlessly attacked queer and indigenous communities.
Ele começa a ficar meio assim, meio gayzinho. Leva couro, ele muda o comportamento dele.
And asserted his masculinity through acts of military might and bravado. Meanwhile, agribusiness and ranchers were slashing and burning the edges of Brazilian Amazon at unprecedented rates. For Bolsonaro, this made sense, because in his eyes, to be a man, to be a leader, means the domination of the natural world. He put it quite bluntly when he said that the Amazon is like a virgin that every pervert from the outside lusts for. This casual and violent misogyny acts as a justification for environmental destruction and extractive industries. For both Trump and Bolsonaro, they excuse their rampant emissions and destruction as just the reality of being a man. For them, the natural world is just another woman to be controlled and dominated, and fossil fuels are the tool that gives them the power to do it. But this petromasculinity also seems to pervade the ideologies of men outside the realms of government. Notorious rapist and sex trafficker Andrew Tate put on a masterclass of reactionary petromasculinity with his tweet to Greta Thunberg. Tate, a figurehead of modern patriarchal masculinity, boasted to Thunberg about his fleet of expensive cars with enormous emissions footprints. Echoing the rolling coal mentality, Tate ties a direct line between manhood, his dominance, his overconfidence, his virility, to the amount of damage he causes to the planet. And again, we see the likes of Jordan Peterson take this from a different angle. In an interview, he claims that most of the global warming posturing is a masquerade for anti-capitalists to have a go at the Western patriarchy. In arguing this, Peterson protects and venerates environmentally destructive lifestyles through climate denial, while implying that there is nothing wrong with the patriarchal and capitalist structures driving us into this crisis. All of these men are reacting to a deep-seated crisis that pulls into question what's given them power and value. Under a crisis driven by fossil fuels and business-as-usual capitalism, our only way to escape that crisis is the complete abolition of the extractive fuel industry. But in the process of doing so, those that have hitched both their monetary worth and manhood to the burning of oil and gas will overreact in defensiveness, shoring up and hardening the connection between the burning of fossil fuels and the strength, dominance, and control associated with patriarchal manhood. But petromasculinity masculinity is just one of a multitude of reactions. As we'll soon see, there's another wolf masquerading in sheep's clothing, protecting and reasserting patriarchal gender ideals during the climate crisis. Francis Bacon's ghost is alive and well in the halls of Silicon Valley. There, the leaders of tech companies and science think tanks are positioning themselves as lighthouses in the stormy chaos of climate change. Out of the climate crisis has grown a patriarchal reaction to climate action that doesn't reject it, but instead aligns with it. An eco-modernist masculinity. One that, much like the teachings of Francis Bacon in the 17th century, tackles the climate crisis through technological control and dominance over nature. If petromasculinity could very simplistically be equated with an alignment to big oil, then eco-modern masculinities would most likely be found in the halls of big tech. As Kara Daggett writes, petromasculinity embraces fossil fuels and authoritarian strongmen, while eco-modern masculinity embraces green futures and liberalism. They both share misogynistic tendencies, both approach the more than human world as something to be controlled, and both worship unlimited growth of profits and energy as sacrosanct. This eco-modern masculinity, which reaffirms patriarchal gender roles through the performance of technological mastery over nature, bleeds through tech gurus like Elon Musk, a man who couches low and zero carbon solutions in patriarchal thought. For Musk and those steeped in eco-modernist masculinity, there is a deep anxiety that comes with environmental action. For so long, environmental action has been coded as feminine, as weak, and as emasculating. Thus, those electric trucks or cars must overcompensate. The eco-modernist man must show that his new carbon-saving technology makes him even more manly. As Daggett writes, Musk's Cybertruck event revealed a dreadful anxiety beneath eco-modern masculinity. The fear that one's masculinity will be deemed fake. Eco-modern men may use new technologies, Musk argues, but these must be proven as superior in the same old values of toughness.
You want a truck that's really tough, not fake tough?
This seems to be the trend in electric trucks, with the constant one-upmanship pervading the rollout of the electric F-150 and the Hummer. All seem to be souped up with extra bells and whistles as a way to prove that there's still a car for tough men.
Adios, amigos.
Carried into the realm of science and climate solutions, eco-modernist masculinity seems to drive the hubris of geoengineering, a wholly unproven and wildly risky strategy. It seems that the club of geoengineers, which tend to be predominantly white men from the imperial core, manifest their overconfidence and desire for control in the literal dominance of the atmosphere. These are men who believe that they can save the world by changing nature itself.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
Embracing a masculine military mindset, geoengineers invoke a war against climate change, proposing outfitting bombers and launching rockets into the atmosphere to fight global warming. As capitalism and patriarchal systems push us deeper into the climate crisis, and as anti-racist, anti-sexist climate justice movements grow, those oppressive systems seek to transform to stay alive. For petromasculinity, that means the reassertion of manhood by doubling down on natural destruction. While for eco-modern masculinity, it means engineering virility through technological dominance. But these hegemonic masculinities don't just pulse through the halls of power. Patriarchal politics have long been at work within movements, driving wedges between people and preventing needed transformation. In early winter of 2008, Brandon Darby was busy helping organize militant protests for the upcoming Republican National Convention. Co-founder of the leftist mutual aid group Common Ground Relief, which sought to provide direct aid to those suffering after the catastrophe of Hurricane Katrina, Darby was known in his circle as a charismatic activist and leader. But in 2008, while Darby was busy organizing, he was also busy acting as an informant for the FBI. Starting in 2007, Brandon Darby enmeshed himself in groups organizing to disrupt the upcoming national convention. He wore recording devices to meetings, egged on acts of violence, and eventually testified against 2 of his fellow activists, sending them to prison. But the damage Darby sowed across his sphere of influence went much deeper. As Malik Rahim, fellow co-founder of Common Ground Relief, laments,
I know that it's been many people that left from Common Ground in frustration, and many of it was due in part because of Brandon. Many young ladies that he has literally ran off.
Darby wasn't just an informant. He was a white man steeped in misogyny and patriarchy who continuously disrupted movements for personal power and sexual gain. As scholar activist Courtney Desiree Morris writes in a piece for Makeshift magazine, Darby created conflict in all of the organizations he worked with, adding that Darby's misogyny and FBI informing wasn't a coincidence, because we might think of these misogynists as inadvertent agents of the state. Regardless of whether they're actually informants or not, the work that they do supports the state's ongoing campaign of terror against social movements and the people who create them. Patriarchal masculinities and misogynies have long destroyed movements, whether through sexual violence or patriarchal oppression. Misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia within movements pushes out queer, trans, and femme people and demands male dominance and leadership. As Morris notes, prominent activists like Angela Davis, Assata Shakur, and Elaine Brown, each at different points in their experiences organizing with the Black Panther Party, cited sexism and the exploitation of women and their organizing labor in the Black Panther Party as one of the primary reasons for leaving the group. In short, misogyny and our collective tolerance of it erodes movements. It centers dominance, control, individuality, and power while devaluing characteristics crucial to effective organization like collectivity, deep listening, and empathy. This taint of patriarchal masculinity touches climate organizing circles across the planet. One 18-month study observing a climate action group made up of university students revealed how ingrained conceptions of patriarchal masculinity can erode the cohesiveness of a climate movement from the inside out. The research team found that white men engaged in multiple practices of hegemonic masculinity as a way of reinforcing their claims to leadership of the group. In particular, they found that white men were much more likely to use exclusive talk or the narrowing of conversation to just a couple of people in a group setting with inaccessible rapid speaking in order to make decisions within a closed small group of participating speakers, thus devaluing group consensus, creating hierarchy, and consolidating power to just a few men. The researchers also observed the production of hierarchical expertise, structured by race and gender, as an active process in their group. The paper asserts that the white men in the group enacted a form of hegemonic masculinity by continually asserting their claim to expertise through devaluing how women and people of color wanted to work, and arguing that the men's frame was more rational, practical, and appropriate to the task. The men in the group combined this with the patriarchal practice of equating participation with expertise. During one 10-minute introduction to new members, for example, where there were 16 women and 9 men in attendance, 4 white men spoke a total of 41 times for a total duration of almost 9 minutes. 2 women spoke a total of 20 times with a total duration of just under a minute. In short, men, through their performance of patriarchal masculine values of dominance, control, and individualism, took the reins of the university group and steered it into a direction that lacked collective input. White men like me are doing this knowingly and unknowingly across the climate movement. Indeed, what does it mean for someone like me to hold such a massive platform speaking to hundreds of thousands of people? Am I just performing another version of patriarchal masculinity? These are the questions any of us with structural power and privilege need to be asking ourselves as we struggle for an environmentally just world. But they're only the first step. We need to be taking leaps and bounds in the personal and political realms to truly find liberation. The climate crisis is not only a crisis born out of capitalism or colonialism. It's also born out of patriarchal oppression. The backlash against fossil fuel abolition is tied to a deep fear of emasculation, of losing value under a patriarchal system. The technological hubris of geoengineering and the posturing of big tech is fueled by an anxiety of being seen as weak and feminine. The very movements seeking to erode fossil capital are themselves eroded by the misogyny of dedicated movement leaders and participants. So in order to create a world beyond fossil capitalism, beyond colonialism and racism, we must also dismantle the patriarchy. Radical feminism is an essential tool for this task. Feminism offers the tools to understand and dismantle patriarchal oppression at the root, liberating all people from gender oppression. I've spent this whole video talking about masculinities, how their patriarchal forms taint and corrupt action and act as justification for destruction of the environment. So it would follow that the path away from those destructive forms of manhood manhood would be a positive masculinity, a healthy masculinity. While we do need more healthy and ethical examples for men in the short term, maybe that shouldn't be our North Star. A focus on healthy masculinities, or quote-unquote good masculinities, merely reinforces a binary split in gender, where masculinity and femininity are wholly separate and even opposed. Maybe instead we need to embrace deep empathy and feeling regardless of gender identity. We should be chasing after the goal of being positive and ethical people, challenging ourselves, especially white men, to engage deeply within our internal worlds so that we might become not ethical and empathetic men, but instead human beings that exist in an interconnected natural world. As Bell Hooks writes, imagine living in a world where there is no domination, where females and males are not alike or even always equal, but where a vision of mutuality is the ethos shaping our interaction. So instead of striving for the healthy masculinities that only somewhat challenge the power of the patriarchal system, we should instead struggle for a world beyond patriarchy, where we don't need to dominate and destroy nature and our fellow humans to feel valued and loved. And there have been a number of attempts to push for ecological manhood and masculinity. Men's movements in the 1990s all the way up until today have sought to push back against patriarchal manhood through an ecological masculinity. But those movements are a little murkier than they might first appear. A history that I unpack in an exclusive video that you can only find on the creator-owned streaming service Nebula. Some scholars have hoisted up the idea of ecological masculinity as the answer to patriarchal environmental violence. There, you can watch my upcoming video a month early, 25 bonus and extended OCC videos, alongside a ton of other exclusive content from creators like Second Thought, Foreign Man in a Foreign Land, and Cat Black. I've recently been learning a lot about the rise of fascism in Second Thought's Nebula original series F is for Fascism,
and how fascism so effectively became the way of life for an entire country.
And I also highly recommend watching the witty and sharp media criticism series by Maggie Mae Fish that explores the history of sex, sexuality, and gender in film.
Look at the directors, moments, and movements that push the boundaries of gender and representation on the big screen.
And on top of all of that, Nebula has a whole host of classes from creators like Simon Clark.
But how do we actually tell that story in an effective way?
And Foreign Man in a Foreign Land.
And try to tell that story with as much vulnerability and honesty,
which have definitely upped my video making and storytelling skills. Signing up for Nebula using my link is the best way to support our changing climate. It's like Patreon combined with Netflix, but better for me and you. And I've got an exclusive deal for you right now. If you sign up for Nebula using the link on screen or in the description, you can get 40% off per year, which is just $2.50 a month. Signing up for Nebula is the single best way to support our changing climate. And in the process, you can watch my videos a month early, get access to all my ad-free exclusive videos, and support a blossoming collective of educational creators.